great. Well, you guys want to get started for this evening? Cool. Awesome. So I talked with Kevin earlier this week on Monday. I think our plan for tonight is to finish up our conversation about modules. And then Kevin, was I correct that we're going to jump into packages? Were you cool with doing that or no?
I'm going to see. I'm just going to cover modules just real quick where I may not have touched upon greatly, kind of revisit some topics that I wanted to cover. And then I want to show you this Golem App that uses modules to kind of reinforce what we've gone over. And then maybe that will lead me to packages, but I didn't get a good, I can talk about the motivation for packages, but I want to see how. I'm not a good estimator of time, but I can kind of go into the chapter of what they covered, if that's okay.
Yeah, no, that's cool. Yeah, no, I totally understand because you've been really busy. So even if we don't get to packages, that's fine. In all honesty, like looking at the packages chapter, if we have to move that to next week, packages should take 20 minutes at max for this chapter.
And just let me give you a heads up. Like I looked at what the other cohort did for testing and someone went above and beyond. It's really awesome what they did with their testing. It's maybe better than the chapter because I found the chapter a little confused. Like it was hard for me to put, I have some other resources for the chapter, but what they did in their section of it's amazing. I was like, oh my gosh, this is great. I'm learning so much. It's super awesome. So just take note of that. You may want to review the book club, the book down section of the testing. It's amazing resources in there. Really hands-on.
No, that would be good. The other thing after we get done tonight, I kind of want to discuss like moving forward because we only have really only like 4 chapters left, and security, the chapter is not very long, and then performance is a little bit longer. So maybe afterwards, when we get towards the end, we can kind of talk about like where we want to go next and how we want to kind of finish it up because we're really, really close. But yeah, I can't remember who's with Ryan. Did you say somebody said they're going to take testing, or maybe I'm just thinking?
I think I said I would, but I don't know.
I'm open for everything or anything. I was going to let you know in Russ's engineering shiny apps, he's going to give chapter 16, and I was planning on doing chapter 17, which is JavaScript. I didn't see that there was a lot of JavaScript messaging in or listing in our remaining chapters. Maybe in the performance section. I haven't got to that point yet, but I can reuse some of the material if anybody wants to touch on any JavaScript oriented details. I got about a week and a half before I'm ready to present that.
Yeah, maybe we could talk about it afterwards. Just get a sense of who can take what and stuff like that and figure out kind of the ending point. But yeah, that's kind of the plan for tonight. So I'll turn it over to you, Kevin, and you can kind of just carry on the conversation.
Okay. Let's see. Let me see. Let me fire up the. All right, are you guys seeing the modules, the book club? Just wanted to kind of cover the bases. Modules, of course, are just miniature apps within the larger app. They're kind of like puzzle pieces that form a picture. And I just wanted to cover, I wanted to come back to the structure of a module really quick. Because this follows a little bit more closely with the book, and then kind of highlight back, and I'll just touch on this really briefly, but there's 2 parts. You have your UI and your server, and I just wanted to make sure we got over, and then what may be unfamiliar is a tag list. but that's just your inputs and outputs, and it doesn't have to have like your fluid page or column specifications. But the important point here is that you have a namespace ID, and this NS ID is what you're owning the block with that section. That's your bins for that UI that you can fit in. And then in another maybe UI, you can use another ID of variable, because that the Shiny app knows that that belongs to this namespace. It's kind of like when you do clashing functions in packages, the same concept applies. And I just really wanted to emphasize that. You know, when I ran this snippet, I got the item with the NS. This is just a shortcut for your namespace, so you don't have to write all this typing out, because believe me, you'll forget to put in the NS anyway. But this saves you a little bit of typing to do this shortcut right here. And I just wanted to touch on that. And this kind of comes back, you know, I went back to try to help myself understand to engineering production grade Shiny apps by Colin Fay and the Golem. And they have a really good section on namespaces and modules about why it's so important, because this is something I was guilty of when I first started doing apps, big apps, is I would have all these inputs and then they would clash because I didn't name an ID, input 1, input 2. And so there's a good discussion on namespacing. I thought it was a little bit more explicit in this section right here. You can effectively create IDs without conflicting with other IDs, and keeping track of the other IDs for multiple controls can become unmanageable as the application grows. So, you know, it's that comparison of when, again, like the function calls, you know, when you load dplyr, you get that warning that there's another filter. And so you want to, sometimes you need to be explicit about what function you're using. And the same goes for Shiny modules. And I'm going to skip over this section. What I want, my goal for you guys to come away with is to be able to pass data from one module to the other, because I think that's the most important concept, and I don't feel like I got that across. And when I was looking at the engineering production Shiny, engineering production grade Shiny apps, and I had shared this with Ryan prior, and I went back to it, and I like the example he uses because it strips it. It's a little bit, there's not as much happening, so it's a little bit easier to teach off of, I felt like. So here we have module 1, and it's just, this should look familiar. It's just a slider input where you're choosing a number, right? So then you have your choice server, very basic, and then you have a reactive as an input choice. So you're making that, whatever the value is here is becoming a reactive. So now you have another module to print out that application. So again, you have your NS, and that's your namespace. But here in the printing server, you have an argument in here. You have your ID and your number. This is a little bit different because all modules are going to have that ID, but this time you're going to give it an argument of a number. And down here, you have your output print, render print, number right here. And that's going to render your choice server up here, your choice up here. So now you're putting it together in an app. So you're doing your choice UI that was up here, and you're doing UI1, printer UI, and that's just the argument call. That could be arbitrary number, but it's consistent. And why this works, I don't really know, but this is the link right here. This section right here, you're defining a variable, number first mod, and you're passing it to the choice server. That was up there. Okay. And now you're going printer server. You're calling the printer server print UI. And remember that number that we had up in the printer server right here? You're assigning that to the number first mod. This is confusing as heck to me, but it does work. But those link it together. Does anyone have see Ryan came off?
Yeah, I think that's a recursive call. I think you're looping through, you're iterating through, you're modifying the number first mod, you're assigning it choice server, choice UI number 1. When the number equals number first mod is called, it's going to go back up and look and say, oh, what did you assign it again? I think if you compare it to the top block as it's iterating out, because the choices were 1, 10, and 5. So depending on how many times you want to run this particular call, Connor, I know you've done recursive content before, or you've talked about it in the past. Are you taking a similar thought on this as well? Because it's not technically a for loop, right? Or it's not a do while loop or a per command or anything like that. But I think what we're ping ponging back and forth is just updating and iterating through, resetting the number, assigning it a new value, and then running the value over again.
Yeah, is this different than reactive?
You're assigning it because it's a reactive up here, the input choice. So you're just taking that reactive, I do believe, and bringing it here. You're just bringing it to number first mod. Why exactly how this works, I don't know, but it does work.
Choice ID was looking for, or choice server was looking for an ID, correct? And we're passing the ID choice UI number 1.
So printer server number right there.
Okay.
And I was confused because I reversed this. When I tried this out, I reversed it to see if it would work, because this seems out of order to me, thinking about it. So I put the printer server first and then put the number first, and it works either way. But I was like, well, I'll just keep fidelity to the model. And then I was going to put both, but then I don't want to make it confusing, any more confusing than it is. So I just kept it how it is in the book. But that is, if you look up in the example, the case studies example, that's what he's doing, but there's just a lot more happening up there. And so I like this example because it's a little bit more focused, because there's a lot happening in those examples up top, and I was getting confused. There is another strategy that he talks about. This isn't in the Mastering Shiny book, but I thought I would bring it for our discussion. It's where you create global reactive values in the application server to be called upon in other servers. This makes it a little bit more explicit, but there's some nuances to it. So this is very similar to up top, but you'll notice in the choice server, we're adding the R argument, and that just means reactive in the context. But notice he's not making it reactive right here. So it's a little bit different. He's not making the choice. This input's no longer reactive in this example right here, but he's got R number from first mod input choice. And you'll see it'll kind of start coming together as we get further down. So again, now we're in the printer server, we have the ID and R argument. This looks familiar. And now when we get to the application server, we're defining the R as reactive values. And we're saying choice server, choice R equals R, printing server to R equals R. And that gives the reactive values and ties the two modules together. And both servers take reactive values set in the first mod and printed in the second one. Are there any questions about that? I know it's hard to get your head around.
I think that's the most challenging portion of it is just like, these things are connected in some way. It's just when you look at all the code at once, it's just like you lose where the connections are. And so it's like trying to figure out, like I tried messing around with modules last week, and it's like, well, if there was just some like graph, and I know we could just go back to the reactive graph, and I'm sure it probably looks just like any reactive graph would, but like some other way to represent it visually to kind of show the connections. And so that's where I get lost, is it's like, I know these are all connected in some way, but once you start like layering on like the UI element, the server element, and then the application element, and then you put it all together, you lose those connections because you're trying to hold a lot in your head.
So, and I don't know if I'm obsessed with understanding this, so this is why I'm coming back to it and bringing it to end. Because let's see, this first strategy, when if you notice in the book, they talked about changing the function calls for the modules, and I knew how to pass a very like an input, make it reactive in the old module structure, but when they changed, I couldn't figure it out. So this has been my white shark, and this example brought me back. This looks vaguely familiar to how I used the call module and did it, because I think I stole some code or borrowed the idea, the concept of taking that, making that reactive. And this looks very familiar how I did it using the old system. So it's a little bit different.
Yeah, that first example that you shared really kind of really kind of centers it back to it, because it seems like with modules, things can get really complicated really quick. Yeah. Because, and I don't want to dominate the conversation here, but like when I was trying to do a module, I was trying to do the module, and then I was like, well, there's a lot of repetition in the module. Let's apply functional programming to this as well. And then it was just like, then it just all came crashing down because because I was trying to manage so much stuff in my head and it just wasn't coming together. So
well, I'm glad these examples, I was a little worried about taking from another book, but I was like, this helps me understand it. So it's like, but let me show you in the book down below, go to the next section. These this app is really good to show. You can see the difference between an app without a module and let me just click on there. Did you guys go with me to GitHub? Okay.
Yep.
Let's look at this. Let's see. So this is without modules. It's 146. It's not too bad. But there's a lot happening here. Let's go back. And then you have another. Sorry, I'm going a little too fast. I didn't mean to really go over this, but I just wanted to show you that they have an example of one with a module. And I am going to open up, I'm going to get out of here real quick and then open up. So I want to show you the app first, what it looks like, because I think that will be beneficial. Okay. This is the structure of a Golem app. So you have to load the package up and then run the app. Then I have to open it up. Let me open it up all the way. Let me. Sorry, having this. There we go. Let me open this up. So if we look at this app, right here, the selection criteria is a module, the volcanoes, and if I select it, this is a module, this big map, and this bar plot are all separate modules to come together to form an app. And it's a lot of fun to play with. But I'll show you how it's structured a little bit more. So you have your app UI, and there's a lot happening here, but right here is where they put in the select module. So that was on the left-hand corner. The bar plot was right down here. And then right down, and then the big map was right here.
So Kevin, the numbers that we have here, Volcano Select 1, Volcano Map 1, these are all just arbitrary values, right? It's whatever we want to call it. I'm noticing the same pattern though as the _1.
Golem sets it up for you though.
Okay, that's it. All
there
right.
is a, and I'll show you right here. So here's the select module. And so this is the inputs. Down here, do you see how they set it up for you? He sets it up for you. It's all when you select them, when you create a module, this is created for you. So it knows it by what you name it, and then it'll just automatically add a _1. And then for your server function, and then you just copy that into the UI, and then you copy that into the server. This is why, good and bad, because I never had to think about it before, because I always used Golem when I did modules, because it's the only way I could figure it out. But I never really understood that until I got into this chapter. And that's why I was like, oh, wow, you can actually make this whatever you want. If I made this 2 and 2, as long as they match, you could rename it, but why would you do it if it's already set up for you? All right. You see this volcano data? See, where in the world does that come from? We'll come back to it, but this is why this app is a great example, because it's not too much, but it's got a lot happening. So now I have the Volcano Map. This is the big map and the kind of the main feature. And so notice how in the server, he's calling selected volcanoes right here. There's no, I know you guys, it's hard to parse through this, but there's no reading of any other data, but it's reading data. I'll just show you how that works.
Yeah, so that was my question. Like when I was looking at this, having it organized using Golem, and again, if I don't know Golem as well as some of the people here, so excuse me if I'm being naive. But like going back to the Mastering Shiny book, one portion of creating modules was that idea of creating the app at the end at the end of the module itself, so that you could run that module in isolation. And so does Golem do that, or does it just set up the modules and then you're just testing the app as a whole? Because I thought one benefit for doing modules like how Mastering Shiny does it is because at the end you can create that last part that creates like a separate application that you could run in isolation. And I mean, again, if I'm being naive, just, apologies, because I don't know Golem as well.
It's a good point. I've never really thought of doing it because I do it in terms of one, you could use another, because you're creating a package, so you could use it as another within the context of another app. But I'm trying to think, would it work independently? Depends. I think it depends. But that's a good question.
Yeah, because I mean, when you said like the volcano, like going back to that like mod Volcano Select, it had that data volcano going into it. So I was sitting there, I was like, well, does that mean that module can work in isolation outside of the app as a whole, as long as it had data to be inputted into it? And so I didn't know.
I would say you could make it work.
Mm-hmm.
But also with the tag list, I think that could be a problem too. I think when they're talking about reusable, I think they're mostly meaning, I don't know. I think it depends. Like I'm gonna go back to it depends, because you have your tag list, right?
Mm-hmm.
So in a tag list, if you just had the inputs and outputs, it would be a little. I don't know if that would work great.
Yeah, and that was the other question that I had too, thinking about it, and is like the idea with like the tag list, like that works great if you have all the inputs in one area. But I thought somewhere in the book it was talking about like if you wanted to separate those inputs out from the module. So say you want to like change those in the layout of your application, you would create two UI functions in your like whole module file.
Let's go back to this app UI.
Mm-hmm.
See what he does. He's got a shiny dashboard layout right here. And he's got the box shiny dashboard box function, and he's putting it within the Volcano Select module within that box. That's where he's putting it. Does that answer your question?
Well, I was thinking about like, so do you have, I don't know if it's in this application or not, but like a UI function in the module that the tag list has multiple inputs in it. I don't know if this app has one. I know when you shared like from the example from the book, like this one right here, right? No,
there's not multiples. There's not multiples.
There's just one. But say you had, oh, go ahead. Sorry, Kevin.
I was just gonna say this is just a very specific app, but I know what you're talking about.
So like, say like, I mean, just using this as an example. So say you had another widget in here, like, say you had another checkbox group button, but you didn't want to force that one input into where that other checkbox group button was. Say you wanted to put that somewhere totally different in the layout, could you separate these UI functions out so that you could put one input here from the module and another input from the other module? Or maybe maybe that's not the appropriate use case for the module, but that's something that I ran into kind of playing with it this week, was that idea of like, can I split up the inputs? So
I think you can. It would just need to make sure that you're passing it as arguments into the main function that's building your entire page. I think to answer your question, yes, you can. It's being able to separate or categorize them in their own element and then calling on those elements to build the entire page. So like when you do your input output session, that last call or run app in Golem, what you're doing is taking all of the instructions to build the web app and creating that web UI. So your different, I don't want to call them widgets, your different elements, your checkboxes, your sliders, your action buttons, etc. Each one of them can have their own names. They're going to all come together. You just need to make sure you're calling on them to build on it. Does that help, Colin?
Yeah, it does.
I think so. You're saying that, but I think I see what you mean. So in this Volcano Select 1 module, you're saying you'd want like another input somewhere else. I think you'd have to make two different, because I think that would carry all of them. I think if you put this in here, that's going to carry this whole section right here. So if you wanted like something like another input thing, if you didn't want both of them, then I think you'd have to segment them out into a separate module. I think if you didn't want them together, because I think if you put in another module, if you put in another input in this section right here, it's going to carry it with it, to my understanding, because once you put that in, that's going to take the whole thing with it. So let me show you the app server. This is really cool and confusing. It says a lot in this little. So now we've read right here, Volcano data, read RDS data, shows the directory where it's at. And these are the concepts I was talking about earlier. So now this is strategy 1, selected data. You're calling the mod Volcano select server, Volcano select 1, Volcano equals Volcano data. Mod, so then you're doing it again here. Your mod continent plot server, continent plot 1, Volcano equals Volcano data, selected volcanoes equals selected data. These are how those three, and then again here, selected volcanoes equals selected data. That's how all of that's being tied together. Really complicated, but kind of easy to follow rather than a really complex, app. So you can, I'm going to be studying this app quite a bit. Because if we go to you study this, this is the only place there's any reference to Volcano. I guess right here, it's the argument in the server is Volcano. So you have to remember to make these arguments in that server to make it all tie together.
Can you pass the repo in the chat?
Yeah.
Because now you got me curious too of where Volcano comes from.
Got it okay, Kevin. If not, I can dump it real quick.
Let me stop sharing for a second.
What I think's going on, Colin, in relation to Kevin's explanation of mods and functions, we're seeing that we're making these placeholders, right? And the placeholder is its own, because it's a Golem app, it's actually adding that mod on the front of it, but you can create as many of those as you want. It's going to preface it with either an app UI or the mod UI. The calls that you're making inside there, one of the things I wanted to iterate, this is a Shiny dashboard. The Shiny dashboard widget has certain elements that get populated automatically. So just right off the bat, you're going to have this 3-pane output of, you know, your selection, your potential plotting or sliders or whatever other inputs you want, and then some level of output. The actual dashboard itself, I don't know, the larger portion of your pane, the larger portion of your screen. So you're able to read in data, select from that data, and then populate it back out in that larger context. The Shiny widget or the dashboard element has its own calls that makes the building of that presentation easier. Do you remember the time viz thing that I showed you earlier? I think I forwarded it to the team. That particular element was also using Shiny dashboard. Building it was easy in the sense that you're not really thinking too much of it, other than making sure you're calling on the right elements to structure the layout the way you want it. Let me see if I can dump that in real quick again while Kevin's doing that.
Let me show you the. So when you do when you start a Golem project, you can lay out your dependencies, you know, these are the dependencies that they're using right here. This is almost like, consider this like almost like a notebook. And then when you add the module, the Volcano select, that's what set up that down below where you had that server, where you see this information, that gets copied right into there. So you get this top part filled out, and then you just fill in the rest. So that's why it's really easy to get started with Golem, because you know, I had a hard time with modules as well until I just started using this, and then I'm like, oh my gosh, without really totally understanding everything, I just made it work.
So this works in the context of like a Golem app, right? So like, and I'm kind of going back to like my first mental model of when I was introduced to modules, was this idea of that, like they were like separate functions that you could create in a package. Like you could just package them up like widgets, right? Like you just package them up in widgets, and you could create your own package and then pass that package on to colleagues, and then they could use those widgets in any application they create. You know, is there, and I mean, is that like, can Golem do that? Like, because the way I understand Golem is it's like you're developing the module in Golem rather than like passing like a package of modules for different apps. And again, this could just be my, you know, lack of experience with Golem, but
you know, without actually doing it yet, I've come close, because I run 2 Shiny dashboards that are pretty similar, but I could use one, and I could use the functions from that package, and I could use I'm fairly certain I could use the modules from that if I wanted. But the programs are different, so like there's not a need, but I bounce things off those 2 apps all the time. Like if I learn to do one thing and one thing, I apply it to the other, but I haven't explicitly used any pages. But I may this spring, I probably will. I may be able to pull in some a module from there.
because that's where my question of like, running the module in isolation, right, was this idea of taking all of your modules that you have, throwing them into a package and being able to run those modules, regardless if it's embedded into some application. And that's where my isolation question came in, was like, well, that's like my mental model of like using modules, is that you can wrap them up into a package, pass them on and use them like widgets, and use those widgets in isolation, is what I was thinking. I don't know if my mental model is correct, but that's what
Nope.
I've been working with. So
I think it's pretty close.
It is close. Yeah. No, you want to try and make your app as small and manageable as possible, right? So you can reuse your code over and over again. I don't know, say you've got your favorite, read JSON or flattening JSON or reading CSV, and you want to create a function or a module out of doing that activity. That can be its own R package contained within your package management. Being able to do a dev tools pull down from GitHub into your environment, making a call similar to dplyr or any other calling on that one particular module. I don't see any problems with doing that. I think that's probably the right way of going about it, especially in a larger grade system, not just a ad hoc single app type scenario.
like I see the utility of it, like when you're using it just for one application, right? Like you're simplifying the application code base, and it allows you to open up multiple, tabs and everything to work in isolation and focus on that one area. But then a part of me was also thinking, well, wouldn't it be nice if you could just wrap it all up in a package, and then being able to work with it in isolation just with that package, as long as you have the correct inputs and the correct data to make it work in isolation outside of whatever application you have. So
I was planning on doing it this program year, but with the updates to R, everything broke, and I didn't have it on I was bad. I learned my lesson not to have something in have it in what's the package where you put it in our environment. So I learned my lesson because it totally broke my app. I had to and it BS4- changed, R changed with that going up to 4.1. I was like, oh, what a headache. Serves me right. Well, do you guys have any questions? I can kind of kick off packages. Because what we're looking at right here is a package structure. So if you want me to touch on that, or if you want me to come back to any module questions you may have.
it's up to the group. I mean, we can have the conversation about packages now and then just kind of have a discussion of it, or we can wait. I mean, it's up to the group. I'm cool with we want to talk about packages because I thought the chapter was pretty straightforward, but I'm open to any other input.
Yeah, I'm happy to start.
Okay. I was going to say, I like using packages, but I'm biased because I have projects that last a year. And so it's like an ongoing thing, and it's going to be, and they're very similar from year to year. There's just some slight changes. So I like packaging them up. And I started using packages, and I had no idea what I was doing, but I figured it out and started getting better. I always think you need a little bit of pressure, but not too much pressure to kind of do it. Like you can say you can do a toy package to practice, but I like the pressure, but not too much pressure. You just got to get it just right. So that's my philosophy on it. I always hear the criticisms that Golem's a little bit too much, and I can see that point of view, but I like using it. And because one, let's open up the description file. This is very powerful because this can also, if you want to Dockerize it or do automated testing, I do believe some of this, if it knows you're telling the computer what it needs to run. This is very powerful right here. What it imports, that gives you a base of your configuration for the what you're going to be running. The namespace is important too, to understand that as well. It gives you some ready-made documentation, and this right here, and with Golem, it gives you a nice structure for your application. Like I said, that description file is really important. You get some documentation if you need that for your future self and others. To me, it's great to go, my clients don't read it, but you can say, I just developed you some software. You're now a software developer, even if it's really simple. And you got the documentation, how to use it. It's built in. Oh, and I wanted to point out in this app too, this is a great app for a host of reasons. You get tests, and I'm jumping the gun a little bit, but check out this directory of their tests. I just never knew you could test a Shiny app that way. So check out that. So, and I would say, you know, also some people get caught up in wanting to have their package on CRAN. For my projects, I don't care. No one's gonna, it's a package for me and my clients. They're not using the functions. I use the functions to parse their data. And so you can do the automated tests that tell you how it is. And then I get notes because of global variables, but I just don't care. But I've built enough infrastructure that I know how to take care of those, that if I ever did want to put something on CRAN, I'm a little bit familiar. I feel like I have a good start. So I'm just kind of covering the motivations. You know, you get some good tests.
Kevin, do you want to touch on the dev? Do you want to open up the dev folder real quick?
Yeah.
So because this is a Golem app and everything about this is kind of a stepped sequence of 1, 2, 3, 4, like how you work through compiling everything together. Go ahead, Kev. I'll let you touch on this.
Okay. Yeah. So you can fill out. It has some functions already for you filled out, or that you fill in. So, you know, your package name can be a little picky when you set it up too. You have to follow some conventions, or there's an argument that you can make to ignore the naming convention. And so you can set up your license, your README, use Git, of course. So it sets up a nice structure for you.
In each one of these steps, you're actually running that R code. So when you look at, you know, Golem set Golem options, or use Git, when you make that function call, just highlight that, you know, line of text, control enter, and it'll run that line. What you're doing is auto populating some of these elements. So I would almost think of a Golem app as being, I don't know, you go to the register to, you know, sign up for a class in college, and you're check marking your name and your social security number, and if you have any financial aid, and, you know, what class is it, what books do you need? Like, that's kind of the concept here. Is it's a template, and the template is asking you to fill in certain attributes that may or may not be important. It's going to give you the full Monty of everything that you need to make a full-fledged package. You don't need to access all of them, you know, at this point in time, but at least the structure is there for you.
Yeah. And if you're not using Golem, just get familiar with use this. It's super helpful to get started. Then this right here is probably one of my favorite little snippets right here. Navigate to file. I use that all the time now just because of Golem. We talked about, did I close it out? The develop. So you can declare your dependencies here. You can add your modules here, and then that sets it up. Add functions, add utility functions, and there's a distinction. I think utilities, correct me if I'm wrong, Ryan, I think those are more internal functions. I use them.
You don't need all of them. Yeah, you don't need all of them. If you run these, it's going to add extra placeholders, I guess we'll call them, to your Golem itself. It's gonna expect that you're going to populate the remaining portions of this. So again, the first iteration, you're just filling in the gaps. As you step further into this sequence of 1, 2, 3, 4, as you run these lines, it's just going to make your app more structured, or add more. I don't want to use the word fluff, but it's making it more substantiated. You're getting more features built into the package itself.
Yeah, and if you use this little function, it'll add the naming convention too. It'll be FCT, the name of your function, and that's handy. I've learned to name my functions consistently within families. To use this, use data raw. If you notice, you can make your own. This will set up a file if you need to create your own data, and it'll, let me just touch on that, and then if you, once you go there, you notice this is where you keep your data. That was where that Volcano RDS file was located. So it's already, that's another great feature of using packages, is that the data, once you have it loaded as some sort of RDA file, it's already there. You don't have to keep reading it in other items. You can just call it. And so maybe a critique of this app is that instead of having it as I guess it doesn't really matter. You wouldn't have to read it. You could just say volcanoes if it was an RDA file, and then it would already be part of the package. I'm surprised it's not just there. Now I'm thinking about it. Using vignettes, another way to document your package or Shiny app and how to use it. Hadley talked about you can put within a package, you can put multiple apps in there. I never know where to put it. Sometimes I will sneak an app in the inst folder, where it's kind of like the closet where you don't want anyone to look. So I'll keep stuff there. I'll put another app in there, like an internal thing. And then there's all sorts of great utilities with GitHub. And Gitlab. Let me go back to the develop. The deploy has some tools to check your app. There's always a fine balance of when you check how your app within the test, because some issues are important, some are not, especially when you're first starting. But you need to constantly do, when you update, wrong. You need to constantly reload your application, because that mimics the simulation. I'll give you, before we wrap up, I'll just wrap it up right now. The one caveat to think about if you do a package, what annoys me the most is if you ever want to do like R Markdown report, is you constantly have to, when you update a function or a data, when you do a Markdown document, you constantly have to reinstall it on your own computer with the build. That's the only thing I find annoying about working in packages. But if you're working outside, you constantly have to install and restart.
Isn't it like Shift Control B will build it? Like if you, is it Shift Control B?
Yep.
Yeah, Control Shift B. Yeah. I found that one to be very useful. And then I think Control Shift T is test.
Control Shift E is
E.
check. Control.
I just know that, when I've kind of gone down that road of package development, it's like everybody's like, learn the hotkeys. Yep, test.
Yep.
Because you're going to be doing them a lot. So
Yes, over and over.
Cool. Well, thanks, Kevin. We got about we're almost to 7:00, and I don't want to hold anybody that needs to leave or anything. I think we pretty much covered everything with packages with that conversation.